Karen and I are excited to bring today's meeting to everybody on some different ways that cities are tackling fleet electrification. And so we have two great presentations coming up. One from Gabe Desmond, who I have the pleasure to introduce today. Gabe is with the City of Sedona. He's going to give us an overview of their new green fleet policy. And Gabe is currently a sustainability coordinator at the City of Sedona. And in his role, he covers sustainable transportation, waste diversion, environmental justice, and climate communications. And he did help write the Sedona's green fleet policy. So he is our expert on the topic. And this was adopted in November 2021. Gabe holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Environmental Studies and Philosophy from Middlebury College. And prior to working with Sedona, he worked and interned for organizations such as the Nature Conservancy, the University of New Hampshire Sustainability Institute, and Middlebury College Office of Sustainability Integration. And it is a pleasure to have Gabe. He is dressed up not only for us, but he's going to be heading to a council meeting after this. And Karen, why don't we go ahead and introduce Lena, and then we'll have Gabe do his presentation.
Sure. So welcome, everyone. Glad to see so many municipalities on the call today. I have the pleasure of introducing a peer in the city of Mesa, Lena Spiric. She's the Energy Water Conservation Coordinator, and she's going to give us an overview today of the city's EV fleet assessment process and results that they conducted with SRP and ICF under the Fleet Assessment Rebate Program. So Danae and I heard you guys loud and clear that you wanted some more information on fleet conversions and fleet analysis. So City of Mesa's undertaken the $20,000 fleet assessment with ICF and SRP. So excited to hear what the results and what her experience has been with that. Lena joined the City of Mesa back in April of 2021 as the Energy Water Conservation Coordinator. Prior to joining the city, Lena was an energy engineer with Noresco. During her tenure with Noresco, Lena performed energy audits and energy savings calcs for institutional, educational, healthcare, and correctional facilities. Lena's also developed cost estimates for energy conservation measures associated with HVAC systems, energy management systems, building envelope improvements, and renewable energy technologies. Lena graduated with a Master's of Science in Architecture from the University of Arizona, College of Architecture, and a Bachelor of Science in Arch from the University of Nis, Serbia College of Architecture. Lena's primary goal is achieving thermal comfort in commercial buildings through energy efficiency in the desert climate. So welcome, Gabe. Welcome, Lena. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Gabe.
Great. Well, Karen, Danae, thanks so much for the introduction and everything you do and coordinating for this group, and as well. And I just want to say I'm really excited to be here. It's been a really great resource for me to be part of this group, and I hope that this can maybe also be helpful to some of our other cities as we're looking to figure this fleet electrification issue out together. So just a little background, our green fleet policy was approved in November, so just a few months ago. And we're still working on implementation and looking at figuring out exactly what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. So we're certainly not complete experts over at Sedona, but certainly have the ball rolling in that direction to meet some of our goals that I'll talk about later. I also just want to give some credit. The initial sort of outline of our green fleet policy was based on the City of Charlotte, North Carolina's green fleet policy, and was done by one of our office's former AmeriCorps, Kaylee Walker, and I sort of took what she had done and turned it into what it is now. So it's been a multi-year sort of process, and I want to give credit where it's due. So I guess just big picture, our green fleet policy is separated into 10 different sections. And so I wanted to sort of go section by section. Why did we include this? What do I think is relevant when you're thinking about including a green fleet policy and approaching low emissions vehicles, zero emission vehicles, whatever you're sort of looking at given the situation of your individual city. So, starting off, just having really clear definitions, I think we use a lot of terms that we're all familiar with in terms of ICE, internal combustion engine, ZEV, zero emissions vehicle, BEVs, PHEVs, all that sort of thing. I think just having that really explicit, there will be folks reading your plan who likely know nothing about electric vehicles, as well as sort of when I do presentations, I'd like to talk about the different charge levels because there's a component around electric vehicle supply equipment in our policy. I think the last really important thing to sort of define was our scope. And so for us, we did it around light duty fleet, like passenger vehicles. And I think just really making that really explicit, what is and isn't included in that. We're not in a position right now where our F350s or F650s that we use in maintenance and wastewater are going to be electrified instantly. And certainly, I think we want to make every possible action we can in Sedona to electrify all of our equipment. But I think it became politically more tenable when we limited this off and said what vehicles we were actually going to incorporate in the policy. And yeah, so that's sort of how we approached our definition section. Sort of the meat of it, what are our goals and objectives? What does this really set out to accomplish? And this is the sort of thing where we had been planting seeds for many years, really, to make sure that this was going to be politically tenable. And so our first step in 2020, we completed a municipal sustainability plan that outlines how we're going to work on internal sustainability, not public facing, just as an institution, what are we going to do? And one of those actions that was outlined was to develop a green fleet policy. So we have, justification for why we're doing this. Likewise, our climate action plan, which was just approved in July, sets a goal of reducing community-wide emissions by 2030. I think about 19% of that is transportation related for the boundaries that we drew for Sedona. And so, obviously it's one of the major things we need to do is to, reduce the number of gas vehicles that are on the road. And electrification is going to be a huge part of that, especially in rural communities. So we have within the CAP, we specifically said that by 2030, we want to strive to have all of our passenger vehicles fully electric or zero emissions. And we chose zero emissions to be a little broader. Right now, we're really only pursuing electrification, but it's possible, if hydrogen fuel cell or some other technologies really accelerate much quicker, that might be also part of what we're doing before 2030 in Sedona. So we just wanted to leave that door open in terms of what we might be adopting. And our intent is to only replace vehicles on their regular replacement timeline. We're not getting rid of gas vehicles that we would still regularly keep driving. And so it's important that we're starting now because sometimes we have vehicles for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And if we're still buying gas vehicles in 3 years, it's going to be difficult for us to have reached that target of completely electric fleet by 2030. So in terms of sort of background impetus, we have our own greenhouse gas inventory. I think this is based on 2018 data, what you're seeing in front of you, which when I was writing the policy was the most up to date we had. I think we now maybe have 2020 data as well. But you can see that our vehicle fleet is the second largest section. It's this little gray section at the bottom. And one next to it, the yellow one, is our employee commute. So just vehicles are about a quarter of our emissions as a organization or as a municipality. And so obviously we don't have a lot of control over what people are driving to and from work. And we're looking at, better housing opportunities if people don't have to commute so far, and better public transit opportunities so folks can bus and bike to work. But where we have a lot of control is over our vehicle fleet. So that's really low-hanging fruit in terms of reducing our own emissions through electrification. We have outlined what metrics we really need to collect in order to be able to successfully understand what we can electrify, when we can electrify, that sort of thing. So we use Geotab telematics. They're a service that we plug into all of our vehicles, and it gives us a bunch of safety data as well that we don't really use, but mostly we use all of our electrification data in terms of how far are these vehicles traveling in any given day, how much are they idling, that sort of thing. So as you can see, we're still in the really early stages of this. We only have 3 EVs or plug-in hybrids right now, so we're not very far along. We mostly have pickup trucks, and that's going to be a big challenge for us in a rural community where we do have staff members that need to go off-road regularly for inspections and that sort of thing. So there's been a big sort of cultural education component to this as well, in terms of, are you driving the best vehicle for what you need? So our Geotab system collects all of our data on miles driven and quantity of fuel, and we have gas receipts as well as charging infrastructure that we use to give us our data on that. And then Bryce, who I think is on the call, does all of our greenhouse gas emissions accounting. And so he's able to tie that into our municipal inventory. And hopefully our hope is then, number 6 on this list, that our chunk of, percentage of emissions from, as well as total emissions from our city fleet is going to decrease. But we also wanted to have a section in there to calculate for some other emissions. Air quality is a big benefit of EVs as well. We're not, we're basically a strip city. We're all along a state highway, and so it's helpful to have less pollutants there on our main walking areas. So we wanted to account for that as well when we talk about some of the climate co-benefits that are really going into environmental health and that sort of thing that are also really important to our office. So I think the selection standards is sort of the key here. This is where this is affecting people outside of our office in terms of what they're doing. So we essentially sort of have a 5-step process. So number 1 is, if you can buy a zero emissions vehicle, do it. It's not always possible. Sometimes we were just all joking about trying to get F-150 Lightnings. There's plenty of supply chain issues going on right now, and it's sometimes difficult to get your hands on the right electric vehicle model, even if it exists. And this is obviously a field that is expanding so quickly. It was like every month there's a new vehicle someone announces. So one of the solutions we have for that is, we're a really small city. We have about, not including police, about 30 vehicles. So we all know each other really well, and we're managing our own sort of procurement. And so because we don't have like a fleet manager, one of the things that doesn't happen is, or each department buys their own vehicles. And the result of that is oftentimes, one small department might have 4 vehicles, and they say, well, we all of these need to be trucks. But it's possible there's a truck somewhere else that we could swap with them and give them a slightly older truck for a year or 2 and buy a new, SUV or sedan that is electric for another department as a way to sort of switch that around. It's cost neutral to the city, but just requires a little more administrative oversight for a small city in terms of, reorganizing who's paying for what out of our budgets and that kind of thing. So then sort of our last step is, if you can't buy an EV, there's no way we can sort of rearrange our fleet to make our new purchase an EV. Then folks can come talk to me, and we either get approval from our sustainability office or from our city manager. I don't see a case when it would go up to the city manager, but we included that just to sort of make that a little more accessible. And so our ultimate goal is that, we won't have to do this, but we're still sort of working out the kinks. This is our first fiscal year where we're going to be implementing an electric first policy. And so we're in that budget process right now, and I'm working with our different departments on that. So we'll see how that goes. But people have broadly been really receptive, and we worked really closely with all of our department heads before we created this policy, so they all knew what was coming. And I think our last sort of 2 notes on this is, we want to prioritize zero emissions vehicles for replacements on vehicles that are our biggest emitters. So not every vehicle is the same. We have some vehicles that maybe get driven less than 100 miles a month, and we have other vehicles that are driving 100 miles a day sometimes. So, obviously we want to replace the ones that are, driving more, have bigger emissions, or are less efficient vehicles because they're older or that kind of thing. And then our one little exception to this is we are going to have a limited number of plug-in hybrids for our pool vehicles. So there are several vehicles that anyone who's a staff member or a counselor can check out for city business. And so we want just sort of to ease that transition to maybe have a couple plug-in hybrids there for long distance travel and that sort of thing. Although we already do have one fully electric vehicle amongst our pool fleet. So then we wanted to talk about replacement timeline. So as I mentioned earlier, our vehicles are only going to be replaced on their normal timeline. This is to help avoid, extra financial burden of this transition and anything like that. And so we, in our budget season, will make recommendations when we know what vehicles each department is looking to replace, and help them identify different zero emissions vehicles that will hopefully meet their department's needs. And really reassess the trends each year, because obviously this is a very fast growing field, and we want to make sure that we're really on top of what is available to us, both theoretically and then also what we can actually get in terms of procurement. So we have a section on charging infrastructure. This isn't really relevant outside of, so I just simplified it here, but I have a list of where I want to see charging infrastructure. This sort of helps with future projects. It's, this has been approved. So if I'm looking to justify building charging infrastructure at a certain location, I can say, well, our green fleet policy has already outlined that this is a high priority location for fleet specific chargers, and it makes it, just sort of makes my life easier going forward in terms of justifying our need for that fleet charging. And I've sort of split it into near term and long term in terms of priorities for where we're going to need to build immediately to work on this transition versus, maybe 3, 4, 5 years from now, we can explore fleet specific charging that will help for police while they're patrolling if there's a particular location they spend a lot of time. So we also have some vehicles are take home. So that's very common in our police department. I think that's one of the sort of perks of being an officer in Sedona is that you can take your vehicle home. And here's a photo of our new all electric zero motorcycle. It's their first police EV, and we're looking to jump on electric cars for them as well when possible. So we have an allocated charging allowance that we'll be able to give folks, and that's already a system we have. Department heads get a charging or get a car allowance that allows them to offset the cost of driving their own vehicles for work. And so we just sort of wanted to tap into that existing financial system so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're going to determine the size of the charging allowance based on typical distance driven and associated electricity costs at that individual staff member's home. And and then we'll hopefully explore maybe what it would look like to pay for some level 2 charging installations, but we're still figuring out sort of the legal details of what we can and can't do and what's in our best interest. But at least to start off, we do have this opportunity and can at least have people level 1 charge overnight and at least recoup their commuting distance, if not more. And so sort of our second to last section is on fuel reduction initiatives. So what can we do outside of new vehicles that will help us reduce the amount of fuel we're using? So one is obviously optimizing our vehicle selection. As I mentioned, we have a lot of trucks. Not everyone probably needs a truck all the time, or they could borrow a truck if needed and could at least use an SUV and have some, they needed the storage space. So there's that. We also are adopting an anti-idling policy, with the caveat, it's, for non-essential idling. So some police do need to idle to keep their equipment running. And, it's increasingly with climate change, more and more 100+ degree days in Sedona. And sometimes you really need the air conditioning and that sort of thing. So our hope is that, that's one of the things that electrification can solve, makes it a little easier to idle without running your whole engine when you aren't actually driving your car. And I just included a little graph here on, how much we're spending each day on idling just over the last week from our telematics system. So I think that's an example of the kind of data we're getting from this, but also demonstrates, just in the last week, we're spent, over $100 idling. And I think that's the kind of information that we take to decision makers and, explain, look, here's one of the perks. It's a lot more efficient to idle an EV than it is to idle a gas vehicle where your engine's running the whole time. So, and then we also have incorporated some things around smart driving habits. Don't want to slam on your brakes, slam on your acceleration, save fuel that way. And also through regular vehicle maintenance that can, keeping your tires properly inflated, that sort of thing that helps your car be more efficient. Oh, and our last section is really was just highly internal, but we in order for us to track how much people are driving and that sort of thing, we really need proper odometer reading, and that's not or reporting, and that's not something that has always historically been done very well. So we wanted to just kind of tack that on as we were already approaching sustainability and in our fleet, and that's an important metric for us as we do our greenhouse gas accounting as well as our planning for our green fleet. So that's a summary of what I have. I do have some extra data slides if folks have questions that come up that are specific to those, but otherwise I will open it up for any questions folks have about Sedona and our fleet.
So Gabe, I've been looking in the chat, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna throw you some questions that folks have been asking
Be great.
in the chat box. So we'll start with Lars ask a question. Have you located infrastructure locations on a map?
Is that in terms of charging infrastructure? Is that your question, Lars? I have just the addresses. I haven't, and some of these are actively being developed as well, but we don't specifically have it on a map. No. But we're also a very small city. I mean, we have almost all of our offices are condensed into one sort of complex, and I mean, one end of Sedona to the others, maybe 4 or 5 miles. It's not like we're as big as Phoenix, so it's, yeah.
Okay. And next question was, how many non-emergency versus passenger vehicles do you have in your fleet?
Yeah, I think that's maybe changing, but I think around 26, maybe a little higher. I guess maybe it's a little higher than that because there are some police vehicles that aren't emergency that are like admin vehicles for them. So I would guess probably right around 30. But I've approached the police side of that slightly separately. So I don't have an exact number, but we're a relatively small fleet outside of our police department.
Okay, so you got 30 non-emergency, and on approximation, how many do you have on emergency?
Oh, about 20.
Okay.
Yeah, and our fire is separate. We have our own fire district that is outside of city jurisdiction, so they have their own setup. But
okay, and along with that, and this is an important question, do you have an understanding of where all of your fleet domiciles? Are they at one location depot? Are they at many?
yeah, so we have our fleet spread across 3 locations predominantly. So we have our main city hall complex. We have a maintenance yard for where all our maintenance operations is based out of, and then we also have a wastewater treatment plant where our wastewater folks are out of. And our police station is at City Hall, so it's just those 3 locations right now.
Okay, well, that certainly makes it a lot easier for Sedona.
Yeah.
Let me look here. Lars also asked, are you using alternative fuels such as CNG or RNG?
Yeah, that's not something we're actively looking at right now. It's potentially something we'd be open to, especially for heavier duty vehicles. We're building our focused transit system, as I mentioned, which is outside of the scope of our green fleet policy, but will be growing our fleet emissions. And I think we're looking predominantly at hybrids for right there, but potentially I think I do see some applicability for some of our like trail light shuttles we're trying to deploy and that sort of thing, but we're not currently.
Okay. And Danae was asking, how did Sedona prioritize fleet-specific EV charging locations?
Yeah, so I think that's predominantly based on where we have vehicles regularly charging. So our short-term priorities, as I mentioned, are these 3 locations where vehicles are regularly parked: City Hall, wastewater, and maintenance yard for us. But we also, have discussed with police. We have a substation in our uptown area, which is our like main touristy shopping district. And we've discussed, wanting to have a fleet-specific charger there so that maybe there's an officer doing paperwork and they could go and plug in while they're doing some paperwork from there instead of having to drive all the way back down to City Hall, which is about 3 miles away, and then charge up. So we've sort of identified just by talking to the folks who drive vehicles and saying, hey, where do you see a need for this? And I think we want to actively respond to that because it's our top priority that that electrification isn't an extra burden on our staff members. There will be a learning curve. That's just part of it. But we don't want anyone to have a bad experience and get turned away, especially as we're initially adopting this. So it's just been discussing with department heads and individuals who have their own assigned vehicles and saying, where do you want to see these?
Okay, thanks for that. And then Anne asked the question, was the at-home charging allowance an idea that Sedona came up with, or did you borrow it from another community's policy?
Oh, that was something that I don't know, I don't want to say came up with, I don't know exactly where I saw that. But I know I've been on some different changes on USDN, Urban Sustainability Directors Network, of different cities across the country who have been approaching that. I think a lot of police departments have take-home vehicles, and how are we going to do this? And so we all sort of chatted, and didn't seem like anyone had a really great idea. And so I just discussed with our finance department. I said, well, what are my options? And it came up, well, we already give these some fuel related allowances to certain folks as a perk of their job. There's no real reason we couldn't offer that to other folks as well. And so we decided to implement that and include that after we discussed with our city management, and everyone seemed open to the idea. And I think especially, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but I mean, electricity is so much cheaper than gas that when we tell them, okay, like even if we're giving people a charging allowance, here's how much we're saving on their gas, invoices. I think it was sort of a no-brainer to move forward with that.
Okay. And Anne also asked a follow-up question. How will Sedona enforce the anti-idling policy internally? And is the city looking to an additional public anti-idle policy?
Yeah, those are both great questions. Thanks. So in terms of enforcement, it's sort of internal. I do, because of our telematics system, I do get information on how much each vehicle is idling. And that honestly has not been something that we've really gone out and enforced. We wanted to sort of set the groundwork for that. And certainly I hope that once this is a little more developed, it's something I'll be able to have conversations with individual departments and individual drivers and say, hey, I saw, you're idling an average of, 4 hours a day. What's up? And have those conversations. I like to always assume the best, then that everyone has good intentions. And I think it's just an educational component for that for me.
Yeah, and to that, I'm going to ask a follow-up question to this. So in terms of telematics, I don't know if you worked there, Gabe, whenever the City of Sedona installed those, but it seems employees are sensitive to telematics and having somebody monitor their driving patterns and driving behaviors. Have you noticed any of that from the use of telematics in the City of Sedona's employees?
Yeah, so actually I was here. That was one of the first things I did, I think my first month. So oftentimes it was, hey, I'm Gabe, by the way, I'm installing a device in your car that's going to give me all this information, which is not not always like the best introduction. But I think the way we approach that is our vehicles are really pretty much only spread amongst 5 departments. And so I talked with those 5 department heads, our public works, community development, wastewater, police chief, and our clerk. And I said, hey, I mean, at this point, the idea was already out there. This wasn't my initiative to start with, but we talked to them and we said, this is something we're interested in doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's the information we'll get. Here's the information we'll use. And part of the tricky part is I get information on whether or not you're wearing your seatbelt. And it's not, I want everyone to be wearing a seatbelt. That's not my job really to enforce that. But we did have to share that data with our safety committee. So if there are complaints from the public of, I saw this so-and-so driving in a city vehicle and they weren't wearing a seatbelt or whatever, that can be resolved. So I think just being really upfront about what I was looking for and letting them know, like, just so somebody else might have access to this information as well. And I think because it came from the department heads who oftentimes had close relationships with their staff, it was not too much of an issue. And they just plug right into the OPP port. It's not installed on the back end. So it would be very easy for folks to unplug them. And that's not an issue I've had at all, actually. We've had a couple knee bump sort of situations, but always right away fixed and, nothing malicious. So I think part of that is having a small tight-knit community of workers here. But also just being really upfront was helpful in terms of having those conversations around telematics.
Great. Thanks for answering that. I have another question here from Nicholas. Are solar renewable energy sources being used to charge the electric fleet? If not, it's causing a larger carbon footprint, whole life included. Simply put, if electricity supply comes from a burning fossil fuel, a faster transition to EVs is likely to increase overall carbon footprint of automobiles. Can you talk to us about your energy source?
Yeah, we do have one solar covered parking that is associated with some of our EV charging. I'm not 100% an expert. There are probably folks on this call who could answer some of the details more in terms of life cycle emissions, but that's not entirely in line with my understanding of what we're talking about. Certainly, in every case, as I mentioned, we're not getting rid of good vehicles, so the embodied carbon is going to exist either way, and there's obviously a slight variation between zero emissions vehicles and gas vehicles on that. But because industrial power plants, to my understanding, are significantly more efficient at processing fossil fuels than like your individual car, there still ends up being increases in efficiency is best of my research, but I'm sure there are folks who have, a lot more experience on this than I do, and open to hearing more from folks.
Okay. Next question is from Jay. How did you go about gaining acceptance or buy-in from your end users? Challenges, success stories with respect to acceptance?
Yeah, I think really finding like champions in each department who are really knowledgeable and excited about this sort of thing. We had a guy over in wastewater who was like really into cars, and he was really excited about EVs. And he's like, okay, like when you're ready to get us like an EV for wastewater, like let me know. I want it to be my car. Like I can work around that. And likewise in police, we have an officer who was really excited about that, and even already has charging technology and started installed in his personal garage for take home that make things simpler. So I think finding those like easy first adopters, and then by and large, once you have an internal advocate who's having a good experience, that sort of news gets spread around the department, and people get excited about having a new vehicle and some of the the co-benefit perks of having an EV. So yeah.
And to dovetail into that, Gabe, did you or anybody on your team do any kind of education and outreach to your employee stakeholders prior to buying the EVs, just to talk about driving behavior and anxieties or fears or fallacies that employees may have had?
Yeah, we did, and I have, let me see if I can pull some of this up. I have like some slides. So here's a good example. So this is like distance and range concerns, and this is one of the conversations I had with folks was, I think the number one thing we hear is, oh, I'm so scared I'm going to run out of charge and I'm going to get stuck on the highway and be screwed. But using our telematics, we sort of did the math, and we only have 3 vehicles that are driving over 1,000 miles a month. So if you can get at least like 200 miles of charge, which we should be on most of our EVs these days, I mean, that's charging only a little over once a week. And we have the infrastructure here. As long as you plug in each night and you do like what you're supposed to do, you follow protocol, you really shouldn't end up with no charge. And then this is also one of the perks of having our pool vehicles that anyone can check out, even if you have an assigned vehicle, that are plug-in hybrids, for example. And that there's still that option. Let's say if you got, you need to drive down to Phoenix or Tucson for a conference, and you're not ready to mess with charging on the road, which I understand, because that, was a new experience for me when I got here and it was using our vehicle, and had to get down to Sahuarita for a conference in an EV. And I learned a lot from that experience. And I know not everyone is ready for that. So we give them that option. You can just go check out this pool vehicle. It's plug-in hybrid. You can plug it in if you want, or you can just drive it on gas to where you need to go, as sort of, a transition system until we're able to go fully electric.
Great. I'm just going to ask one last question from Mel, and then we're going to turn it over to Lena, because it looks like we're going to start running short on time. So last question, Mel asked, did Sedona perform an ROI model, or is it strictly green driven?
Yeah. Let me see if I have some slides on this. I would say it's primarily green driven, but yeah, here we go. Next slide. I have this in order. Good questions. So of our 26 fleet vehicles, we did a ROI, and at least currently, if we replace them, and keep in mind some of these won't be replaced probably for another 3, 4, 5 years. With currently available models, 21 of our 26 fleet vehicles would have lifetime savings. And we estimated that in terms of just fuel, like what we'd be paying in electricity versus gas, we would save about $26,000 a year. It's about $1,000 per vehicle, and probably even more when you take into account lower idling costs. And we estimated for that whole fleet, if we were to lifetime replace them right now, our lifetime we would save about $300,000 for the lifespan of those vehicles. So that's just some initial data that I put together. I have some more in depth, and I think we like to do that for each vehicle we replace as well. But certainly, depending on the vehicle, how much is being driven, how old it is, what its current fuel efficiencies are, it's possible to make really significant financial savings through electrification as well. As long as you can afford that slightly higher upfront costs, you end up saving a lot in maintenance and a lot in gas.
And just real quick, I want to answer Martha's question. What type of EVs did Sedona purchase? I know you've got a Zero motorcycle, and what were your light duty passengers?
Yeah, we have a Chevy Bolt, and we also have some plug-in hybrid Ford Escapes that were just purchased this year. The all-electric thing goes into effect for FY23. So yeah, we're working with folks on those, and we're also looking at getting a Mustang Mach-E for our police department, which I think several other police departments across the country are looking at as a design specifically for police by Ford.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Gabe. It's a great information. And I believe can you put your report in the chat? So if people want to look at your green fleet policy, they can download it.
Yeah, I can send it to Ann maybe, and she can send it out. I don't know that I
Okay.
have like a digital version available, but I can send it out as a PDF for folks in this call.
Great.
Great.
Excellent.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, and and keep putting questions in for Gabe in the chat, and Gabe, you can answer them if they've got some additional. But let's get Lena up next. Lena is going to be again presenting on City of Mesa's experience with ICS SRP's fleet assessment program. So Lena, take it away.
Thank you for having me today. I hope you can all see my screen. Okay. Today I will talk about our ICF report update, Mesa fleet tool, our blink replacement projects, fleet projects, and Harmony Electric assessments that we have completed. So mid last year, our climate action plan got approved by City Council, and we have set 4 aspirational goals in this action plan. First aspirational goal is about carbon neutrality. Our goal is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and enhancing carbon sinks. Our goal is to strive to reduce the carbon footprint of city operations by 50% by 2030. Our second aspirational goal is about renewable energy. The goal is to prioritize the use of renewable resilient energy to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2050. Our third aspirational goal is about materials management. Our goal is to manage material responsibly and divert 90% waste from the landfill by 2050. And our last aspirational goal is about community action and community development. One of the focus areas in our climate action plan is air quality. So in order to improve air quality, city is transitioning city fleet to no and low emission vehicles. City is converting gasoline and diesel powered equipment used by city staff or city contractors, such as landscaping and construction equipment, to electric or low emission fuels. City is trying to reduce employees' vehicle miles traveled during the workday through innovation. City is trying to reduce employees' commute to the workplace on high pollution advisory days. City is trying to implement progress that support employees that use alternative modes of transportation to reduce single occupancy employee commutes to and from workplace. And City is trying to reduce vehicles miles traveled in single occupancy vehicles by expanding transit alternatives like light rail, buses, paratransit, etc. Include an evaluation and implementation of alternatives that connect transit riders' doorstep to destination and promote walkable connections to public facilities, parks, and neighborhood level services. So last year when SRP published their EV rebates, the whole program, one of the rebates was electrification study that would be completed by third party. And this study was funded 50% by SRP. So we signed up for this and we received study done by ICF. And study determined that City of Mesa's total fleet consists of 1,932 vehicles. Out of those are active on the road 1,757 vehicles, and there are 1,437 EV equivalents available. And recommended for conversion would be 820 vehicles. What was excluded from analysis were fire trucks, rescue trucks, brush truck, CNG, and light and heavy duty vehicles. The time frame identified for the vehicle replacement is from 2022 to 2036, which accounts for a maximum vehicle life of 15 years. However, the fleet total cost of ownership analysis extends to 2051 to account for the ongoing fuel and maintenance costs from the vehicles acquired in 2036. As mentioned earlier, ICF assessed the economic feasibility of 1,932 vehicles in Mesa's fleet and identified 1,437 vehicles that have EV options available and 820 of those that would be beneficial to convert over the next 15 years. A chart above illustrates the phasing of these vehicles as the city replaces existing fleet vehicles. These 820 vehicles would result in a net present value total cost of ownership savings of approximately $40 million over the next 30 years, which accounts for the savings across the vehicle's full lifespan. The model used the City of Mesa's in-service dates combined with ICF's vehicle life assumptions to assess which vehicles would be retired in 2022. And there are a high number of vehicles estimated for retirement in 2022 due to the high number of older vehicles within the existing fleet. 23% of vehicles are at least 15 years old, and the shorter lifespans associated with police patrol sedans and SUVs, 28% of the vehicles are police sedans or SUVs. Due to this methodology, it is estimated that 646 vehicles may be up for retirement in 2022, but it's recommended that only 206 of those vehicles will be converted in 2022. So chart on your right-hand side shows the total cost of ownership for the 820 recommended vehicles each year they were replaced with conventional ICE vehicles versus with the recommended EVs. So if vehicle is replaced in 2022, its full total cost of ownership will be illustrated in the 2022 bar. And this chart below shows total cost of ownership result cumulatively. This timeline is based on existing fleet retirement schedule outlined in the chart above. And while initial annual EV costs are higher than IC costs, the overall cumulative EV total cost of ownership is lower due to incentives and reduced operational cost, as shown in the chart below. And based on analysis, converting 822 vehicles to EVs will bring some savings. It will produce approximately $40 million total cost ownership savings over 30 years. It will produce about $22 million fuel cost savings over 30 years. And it will produce about $26 million maintenance savings over 30 years. It will result in 114,929 metric tons of CO2 eliminated over 30 years, and there is some environmental impacts associated with savings. When it comes to charging stations, Mesa will need maximum of 80 DC fast chargers and 740 level 2 chargers to support the recommended 820 EVs. This conservatively assumes a 1-to-1 charger to vehicle ratio and does not account for any existing chargers at Mesa's fleet facilities. And while there are 32 base sites that house Mesa's vehicles, electric vehicle replacement will result in an estimated incremental 3,464 kW total power demand and approximately 5 million annual kWh across 28 Mesa sites, as summarized in table. Depending on the scheduled duty cycles of the vehicles, it may be possible to reduce the number of chargers. So while this ICF study provided us big picture and big vision of electrification in City of Mesa's fleet, City of Mesa's fleet uses its own software to produce retirement of the vehicle. Vehicles in the city are considered for retirement when they become too expensive to maintain. And retirement of the vehicles is not based on age. There are many vehicles that are more than 15 years old, but since they're barely used, they're still in good condition. As some of you may know, there are 8 charging stations in City of Mesa. They're located downtown. We have 3 located Mesa Art Center, 3 located at Main Library, and 2 at the Convention Center. These are currently in engineering design's hands. We're planning to install 2 chargers at City Plaza, and just to emphasize how these projects progress so quickly, we received requests to install additional 5 to 6 more chargers at City Plaza. And Eco Mesa developer is also installing conduit to install even more charging stations in downtown area. When it comes to fleet charging, City of Mesa has 3 main fleet sites, West, East, and 708 West Baseline, which is fire department's fleet. At each of these locations, we are planning to install about 8 EV chargers, 7 level 2, and 1 DC fast charger at each of the locations. We are working on assessments at PD Central and PD Fiesta, and we are also considering to install chargers at Centennial Garage and Pepper Place Garage. Those are ongoing projects. Recently, we have approved master plan study, and with this study, we would like to document the big picture, current and future needs, and evaluate existing electric infrastructure details so we can prioritize EV infrastructure deployment in a rational and cost-effective way. We are also working with our energy resources, pairing new solar shade canopies with EV charging infrastructure in downtown area. When it comes to vehicle replacement, we are closely collaborating with our fleet to transition our fleet to electric vehicles. Recently, we have purchased and received 2 plug-in hybrid Ford Escapes, and we have placed an order for 28 Ford Lightnings. We have commitment from many of our departments to purchase electric vehicles like park rangers, environmental, PD commanders, and fire fleet. And we have been working with Harman Electric on site assessments. So far, we have completed 13 site assessments, and just to install electric infrastructure to be able to install EV charging stations, these costs range from $20,000 to $115,000, depending on the site. It depends on the existing electric infrastructure and the level of chargers. So what these assessments include is to install EMT conduit from electrical room to roof and along down to grade of building, PVC conduit below graded from corner of building to charging equipment location, purchase and install new transformer, purchase and install new panel, new breakers, wire couplings and connectors, safety bollards, permitting, so everything else besides EV charging stations. And that is all I had for you for today. Mesa updates.
Well, thank you, Lena. Mesa is amazing. They're doing some good work. I do have a question about your Harman electrical assessments. Did you put out an RFP, or are they on contract with the city? And you said you did 13. What's your total number of site assessments? And I don't know if you can give us this information, but how much did the Harman contract cost to do those site assessments?
So it started as SRP's recommendation because we were just looking for someone with experience with electric charging stations. So they were recommended from SRP as experts, and they proved to be. So we started, with 1-by-1 assessments, and we were just paying them per assessment, which it depends on the number of chargers that we would, based on number of sites, let's say. And I think it ranges from like $200 per site.
For them to do a site assessment?
Yes.
Okay. And Lori asked, does the study cover all vehicles, even if they are charged by the city utility and or APS instead of SRP?
Yes, it does cover everything. As many of you know, City of Mesa, it has its own utility, which is Energy Resources, and they cover small downtown area, and everything else is SRP. It creates problem for us because part of our fleet is located in downtown area and part of it is in East Mesa. So that makes things complicated with having two utility, one that can provide rebates and one that cannot. But That's our situation.
Mm-hmm. And just Lars was asking about some costs. So I know that SRP provides you $20,000. They'll give you $10,000 up front. And then my understanding is that if you make a recommendation, do a recommendation from the report, they'll give you the remaining 10,000. But I'm fairly certain 20,000 didn't cover the cost of your analysis needed, or did it?
So we paid in addition to that $10,000, and I think the rest of it we will have to make commitment to purchase at least one electric vehicle, which we did. We placed an order. So yeah.
But because you have such a large area and you've got vehicles located in SRP, you're paying more than just they're offering
Right.
you 20, but you're paying something on top of that.
Right.
And Scott Chandler from Phoenix said, did the total cost of ownership of EV savings include installing the EV charging infrastructure? Do you know?
Yes, it does. It includes capital costs of the vehicle, maintenance, fuel costs. It does. I know that they included some of the incentives just to offset that capital cost as well. Charging stations, yes.
But the install and the cost of the charging equipment was included in the TCO? Yes.
Okay. So I'm looking now through my report, but that's what I can recall.
Lena, is the ICF report available to share with organizations, or is that an internal document?
I can ask Laura Heineman, who is our department director, and see her opinion on that.
Sure. Alex Davis with ASU had a question in the chat as to if it is available.
Sure. I'll ask and let you know.
Great.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would be interested in seeing that report, because many of us municipalities, as you know, Lena, are interested in participating in that program as well.
Yes, and you know, if it's any help in making a decision about the electrification report, it does help with big picture, but you know, when you think about recommendation for chargers, so it is determined that we will need 80 DC fast chargers and 740 level 2 chargers. It is good to know, and it's good to know what that equals to in terms of demand, because that's the number that we use now when we, you know, talk about charging stations. But is it realistic to install 80 DC fast chargers? Not really. We are struggling to install one, to be honest, you know, so we are limited with our funds, and we will install what we can and prioritize and see how to get most of it.
And I was a little surprised that the report suggested a 1-to-1 charger vehicle ratio.
Yeah,
I think there's probably opportunity for
or less,
something a little, yeah, or higher than a 1-to-1, maybe a 6-to-1 or a 5-to-1. So something
yes, I was
at.
surprised to see that too, but yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. It's like a very big picture kind of a prediction, rather than something you can use now and say, you know, I will go in the field and install these 740 chargers.
Right. Well, it's certainly a conservative approach and a baseline to start with. So
exactly.
I think it's good information. So Anne, I don't know, or Danae, I don't know if we want to open it up for more questions, or if we want to launch into updates from different municipalities. Anne, what's your approach?
I think we can open it up for a few questions from the group if we have time. I know I put one in the chat just as you were saying that, as to if Mesa expects to do any type of assessment like this again in so many years. Like, is this going to be done like every 5 years or every 3 years? Or...
So yeah, you know, after this report, we came to conclusion that we need more data. And after all these assessments with Harmon Electric, it turned out that, and Karen, we talked about it multiple times, that these infrastructure upgrades are so important and they're so expensive, and we don't know what's out there. So we thought that the most benefits for us would be to do master plan for existing electric infrastructure, just to know what's out there and to document that big picture. What do we have, what we can use, how many transformers do we need transformers, so that's our next step. And we are so glad that this master plan got approved. So, and that brings us then to think, like, are we going to do RFP? How are we going to approach this? Because we would like someone like Harmonic Electric to go out and do the assessment on some of the locations that we select, maybe some suggestions from them, and we would like to proceed with this type of a master plan, electric infrastructure assessment master plan.
Great. Anybody have any further questions for Lena? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Lena, it's Danae, and I so enjoyed you taking time to kind of walk us through this report. I wanted to get just some more kind of general lessons learned from you. So as cities are looking, or local governments are looking to maybe implement or do our own fleet assessments, what are some takeaways that you'd recommend?
Just based on the report, yes, taking advantage of SRP's electrification rebate is good in terms of like getting that big picture, but then it's also important to do site assessments with electric contractor if you have one. I think that can make you or break you, because when you find out that you need to invest between $20,000 and $115,000 just to install charging stations, I think those are most important steps, like having these little studies or one big study, that will help you create that big picture. What do you need to install charging stations and or electrify vehicles? Studies do help with the site assessments. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, that was perfect. The big picture and then the nitty gritty.
Exactly.
Any other questions for Lena? Nope. All right, Lena, excellent job. Wow. That's a lot of information to cover, and I can see where it's incredibly helpful. We did get a couple questions in the chat as far as posting the presentations, and I will be doing that following the meeting. So all you need to do is check our Sustainable Cities Network meetings page under the Solar and Energy Efficiency Workgroup heading. It usually takes a day or two to get those put in by our IT staff, but we'll get those available so everybody can take a look at it. Lena, I guess once you know if you're able to share your ICF report, that would be great. Maybe it's on a case-by-case basis, but yeah, feel free to let us know. And so with that, I just want to say thank you so much to Gabe and Lena. Big round of applause for, wonderful information, so incredibly helpful. There even were a couple of comments in the chat as far as how helpful the information is. So thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate it.